Law enforcement officers of Reddit, is there an arrest in your career that broke your heart to make, but it was your duty to make it? I posted this story in another link a while ago, but figured I share it again. It made such an impact in my career. About 3 years ago I got a call from a man who was concerned about his friend. He wanted us to go with him and a local mental health group to check on him at his apartment. I'll call this man John. The caller, myself, and the mobile mental health workers met us at John's apartment, if I would even call it an apartment. It was a basement apartment with 2 small windows looking out to bring light into the tiny living room. The place was pretty spartan except for a bed, a kitchen table with no chairs, a couch, and a small coffee table with a 3-inch thick journal that was completely filled up with John's writing on the front and back of every page. I quickly learned that John was a Marine and had very recently returned from a 2-year tour in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those 2 years completely and utterly faked him up. He knew basically why we were there and admitted that he wanted to just kill himself, but was not brave enough to do it. He went on to tell me about how he had to kill men, women, and children while he was at war, and read some pages for me out of his journal. I won't write what he read to me, but they were the deepest and most heartbreaking words I have ever heard read out loud. I learned that, after he was at the end of his tour, he was shipped to Italy to await his trip home, and tried to kill himself. He was placed in a mental facility that he described as something out of a horror movie. Once he finally got home, the Marines gave him his honorable discharge and booted him out without another word. It took every ounce of strength I had to not cry. It took a long time and a scary moment where I thought he was going to fight us, but we were able to convince him to go get real help. I told him we could call him an ambulance to bring him to the hospital, because if I drove him, my department rules stated I would have to handcuff him. He didn't have insurance, so I was forced to take him in handcuffs. He got in the back of the police car and started to cry quietly to himself. I broke down at that point. When we got to the hospital I took him out, uncuffed him, and hugged him. He broke down into violent sobs in my arms and we ended up on the ground just crying and holding each other. What did I learn from this one call? That the military and America failed this man. They sent him to war, offered no help when he needed it, and then booted him out into the world. Flash forward 2 more years, John is 100% better. He was transferred to a VA hospital and got the real treatment he needed. I happened to pull over his friend who made the call for speeding, and he told me how John had made a complete change and was so much better. It was the best ending I could have imagined for the worst call I've ever been to. Very early on in my career I went to a domestic. A husband and wife were on the outs and separating. They were arguing, and a neighbor called the police. During the argument the husband takes their wedding photo, rips it in half, bride on one side, groom on the other, and hands half to the wife saying here's your half. In my jurisdiction I have discretion over nearly every enforcement I want or don't want to take. Except for domestic violence. Advocacy groups have forced the issue so hard that I get no discretion at all without placing my job at risk. By definition the picture was communal property, ripping it was criminal damage, and thus a DV crime. The wife didn't want anything done, but in DV crimes, because of advocacy groups, the state assumes the role of the victim. And I was forced to arrest him. He spent the night in jail for ripping his own wedding picture because his marriage didn't work out. I understand why some domestic violence laws exist. We have pushed the umbrella so far to encompass things like ongoing sexual relationships or romantic relationships. And we have lowered the bar of what crimes are included. So now if a third party hears something they didn't like, and you and your boyfriend of 4 weeks were arguing, you can go to jail. People have forgotten that couples argue. Arguing is normal and healthy. But the hands of the officer have been bound by legislation. People are being arrested for losing their temper, raising their voice, and are taken out in handcuffs in front of their spouse, kids, and neighbors. Those arrests never sit right with me. Back when I worked in the legal aid office in our local district court, I had an old lady, 70 plus, knocking at my door on a Friday afternoon. She said that she was late with her payments of a penalty order and wanted to know what to do. It looked like she got used by some of her relatives in connection with fraud. She got a wrist slap in form of a penalty order and was supposed to pay the fine in monthly installments. Apparently she was late with some payments and asked if she could pay them once her retirement money was due next week. I did a routine check and found that she had an outstanding arrest warrant because of her missed payments. As it stood then, I was supposed to arrest her or give her the option to pay right then, but she had not enough money and no way to get her hands on enough on short notice. I tried to call the DA's office to ask if they could temporarily lift the warrant, but as it was Friday afternoon no one was there. What that meant was that this 70-plus-year-old lady would now have to spend at least the weekend in jail. I called the police to have a transport ready to get her there, but when the police officer and I talked it through on the phone we both came to the conclusion that we both did not want to send an old lady like that to jail for late payments that would be dealt with early next week, and that she never really was in my office that day in the first place. So it was my duty to arrest her, but I did not. Not law enforcement, but I got a share. Several years back I had a lemon of a vehicle that had serious electrical problems I could not afford to fix. I was pulled over for an out headlamp, given a fix-it ticket, got it fixed, but I was late for work, so the officer that checked it out said he'd take the ticket in and get it taken care of so I could get to work on time. Turns out he must not have, because it spiraled into the worst law situation of my life. Suspended license, driver responsibility fees, FAC Michigan, and general hell. Fast forward 2 or so years, and I'm still dealing with this situation. I'm paying Michigan close to $4,000 in fees, and trying to get my shit together in life. I'm pulled over for having an out tail light, and told my license is suspended for non-payment of fees to the state. The officer pulled me out of my vehicle and cuffed me, put me in the back of his cruiser. He told me I was being arrested for driving on a suspended license, multiple offenses. I broke down in the back of his car, 23-year-old man crying like this doesn't look good, so he asks me to explain what's going on. My mom had just lost her job, so I'd recently moved back home and was working double to make her mortgage payments, and Michigan wouldn't accept the money I was sending them. Apparently, $50 every 2 weeks wasn't enough, so they'd suspended my license a third time without notifying me. I explained all of this to the officer through the tears. After sitting in the car for a few more minutes while he filled out some paperwork, he let me out of the back, uncuffed me, and told me to drive home while he followed. Once I got back to the house, he handed me a torn up ticket and $200. He told me to send it into Michigan and get back on a payment plan, and that he'd put a note on my file in the city's record that he'd given me 6 months to figure it all out, then wished me luck and drove away. Everything got sorted by the end of the year, and it was thanks to one officer's generosity and understanding. I wish I remembered his name, but he's a shining example of what law enforcers should be like. I had 2, both homeless. This first was one of my very first calls. In a law library, a mentally ill homeless man had found his way inside somehow, and once staff determined that he wasn't a member, they called us. When I arrived, it was quickly obvious that the guy didn't pose a threat to anyone. I think he probably just wanted to be somewhere warm, and they had a very swank interior, like a posh gentleman's club in London, circa 1920. As we explained that he wasn't allowed there and that we were escorting him out, one of us on each side of him, he just started trembling, seemingly uncontrollably. I could see the panic in his eyes and found myself wondering what his prior experiences with law enforcement had been. I was unhappy with having to chuck a guy out in a snowstorm, but he refused the offer of driving him to the shelter nearby, saying he'd been robbed and beat up there. It was then that I realized I needed to carry food with me for taking the sting out of these roust encounters. I figured out later that you can fit 4 power bars in your trauma plate pocket. The second was guy who was HIV+ and had colon cancer. He had a habit of dossing in public view and apparently due to the cancer was constantly covered in excrement. Dispatch would get the call from some outraged citizen or concerned citizen, and this time I was dispatched to take the call. He was sleeping on top of a forced air exchange, warm air outflow, and someone had seen him and made the call. This was in a very expensive tastefully decorated and very politically connected neighborhood. The house is worth fantastic sums, and the people that lived there liked to watch when they made calls to ensure they were getting their money's worth from the lowly civil servants. So I rousted him. The excrement was caked in his clothes. It wasn't just fresh, he'd been living in the jeans for weeks. I gloved up before I said a word to him. He was groggy, possibly on painkillers, and I explained to him what was going on, and he related that he was HIV+, had colon cancer, and had nowhere to go. I had already met him once before with my FTO, so I did my best to be cool with him. I asked if he wanted a ride to the shelter, but it was either that his prescription drugs would be stolen, or they didn't allow HIV+, and he just wouldn't let me drive him there. People mess up our cars all the time. Spit, vomit, drunks piss themselves during transport, there are bitter tears everywhere, all kinds of fluid dynamics. So I knew what I was getting into standing there, pleading with him to let me drive him to a shelter, but he refused, over and over. He was angry, mostly because I think he just wanted to be left alone, but I couldn't let him stay there, and he wouldn't allow me to take him to a shelter. And so off he stumbled into the night, me hating every second of that exchange, looking around as he left, hoping to catch some privileged face peering out from a window, wishing to beam my anger at them. But no one was there. So we are dispatched and find a public intoxication arrest. Nobody else is able to control him. He's drunk, hitting people with his cane on purpose, almost falling over, so he's a public danger to himself or others. But there's a problem. He's sitting on the stairs with his 12-year-old daughter. We try to talk him into cuffs. Talk, but he starts jabbing at me with his cane. Okay, so we grab the cane. He then latches onto the stair railings for dear life. It's now him, me, his daughter, and another officer in this wrestling match on the stairs. I hear people yelling that he's disabled and to watch his head because he has no bones there, and I hear the daughter asking him to stop. Daddy, stop it. We have to strike his arms to break his grip. We stand him up and carry him, still fighting, to the car to try and handcuff him. He chills for a second, but then jumps to put his chin on the top of the car door to choke himself. We drag him off and wrestle him inside, working extra hard not to hit his head on anything. Yeah, he didn't have a skull cap at all. Watching his daughter plead with him to just listen and calm down and stop fighting. And then he yelled at her, and we had to take her back and say that he didn't mean those bad things he said to you. We talked to her for a while about how drinking does bad things sometimes, about dealing with anger, and that she could think about the good times, and she would still grow up and do the cool things she wanted to do. That was really rough. This story is not from me, it is actually from my criminal justice teacher in high school. During 11th grade in Germany I went to America as an exchange student, and because I needed some more credit to fulfill restrictions of German schools I needed one extra class and the counselor advised me to take criminal justice. Basically it was a 100% pass class. You would get all the tests one day before the exam and could learn, so I was there with a lot of jocks and cheerleaders. Whatever, it was one of the most powerful and thought-provoking classes ever. My teacher was the son of a long line of LAPD officers. Just like his dad and granddad he worked as a LAPD officer, but he quit and started teaching. He was the coolest and nicest guy I have met in America and his class about criminal justice was 20% textbook and 80% real life stories from his family/friends or personal stories that either validated the textbook or questioned the authenticity in real world police work. You can imagine it was a kick-ass class. My CJ teacher worked during the riots in LA, and he told us about this experience so honestly and heartbroken that it backquotes hard to forget. Basically they were driving from a Walmart that had been looted and torched. They cleared the people and instantly got the next call to a Taco Bell that had been torched and looted, then a Walgreens etc. So basically they were driving between the same 5 stores, which would get looted and torched. In the end at the last store there was a big mob of black people. My teacher and his driving partner got caught in the middle of the mob with people trying to throw over the car, drag both of them out or smash in the windows. He said it was about 200 people around them, and they were scared for their life. He radioed in what to do in this situation. The operator told them to punch it and drive out of there. That is what they did. They ran over a couple of people and escaped. The problem is that the station chief heard about it from the operator and forced my teacher and about 15 other cars to round up the mob and tag them. When they got there, my teacher saw that several people were injured badly and one person died, and he had to arrest the families of the people he just had to run over. He quit his job a day later and became a teacher. I'm not a law enforcement officer, but I have a friend who was. He retired and got a job working at the same place as I did. It was about an hour drive to work, and we were both from the same town, so we started carpooling. He was about 20 years older than me, and he was everything you think about when you think of a policeman. He was a big guy, about 6'2" and very boastful. He was very intimidating to me, even though he didn't mean to be. Come to find out that we both liked the same type of stuff, so we would go to electronic conventions and stuff together. I ended up getting a divorce and he gave me a call. My ex took everything I had, and he said that him and his wife decided that it was time to get new furniture. He brought my all the living room furniture they had, and it was nice stuff. We are still friends 15 years later, and I have never forgot what he did for me. Law enforcement officers are for the most part just that. They have a job to do, and most of them are just doing their job. It sucks to get a speeding ticket or whatever, but it is really nice when they are there when you need them. They risk their lives every day for little money and no fame. Next time you get a speeding ticket, apologize to the officer for making his job harder. Don't chastise him for giving you the ticket you deserve. Just my 2 cents worth. There used to be this cute girl in my 5th grade class. I would notice she would come in wearing pajamas sometimes, and I would wonder why, since it was cold out and no one else did. One day she walked in and had scratches in her face. Me and a girl asked her why and she said, "Oh, me and my mom just got caught in a cat fight, no big deal." I remember the girl who asked her just cupped her hands towards the side to me and said, "Child abuse." I felt bad because the girl was standing right there. It's not like she couldn't hear you. Anyways, weeks go by and she seems to have rash marks over her face and some bruises on other parts of her body. She sits alone at lunch and girls make jokes about her mother beating her. Anyways, I tried to reach out, since sitting alone in lunch in elementary/middle school is literally the worst thing in the world. All she responded with was, "I'm fine thanks, I'm already finished eating my lunch anyways." So she just sat there, since at the time we couldn't have cell phones or any electronic devices, not even homework. I told the teacher about it. The teacher was shocked and observed the girl the next day, sat down and talked to her. After that day I didn't see her again. The teacher said that she couldn't say what happened, but we'd likely never see her again. However, she was in a better situation now. Apparently the police described the situation of the girl as a sorry state later in a police report on KDKA, our local news station. I always felt bad about the whole situation, like it was my fault for not reporting it sooner or not seeing what was in front of me. Teacher told me not to feel bad, and that I was doing the right thing. She even subtly called out the snobby girls who made fun of her. Sat. TLDR. Girl was abused by mother, tried to hide it, and she was later taken to a foster home. My first shift was the one I remember most vividly. We got briefed that we had to take a kid home, 10 years old, to his mum in the south of the country as his dad didn't have full custody and his mum wanted him home. The intel on the kid was that he was a bit of a troublemaker and could bite/spit, so we were to be aware of officer safety when we picked him up. Nothing worse than being spit on. When we arrived at the house, we were confronted by his dad, who tried to explain to us that his mother was being abusive towards their child, making him sleep on the floor, not feeding him, shouting/degrading him, and that he couldn't let us take him. He then presented us with correspondence from his solicitor stating that he was trying to win custody. However, as we were under orders to take this child home to his mother, we couldn't help him and told the young lad to gather his things. At this point his dad, an ex-army officer, broke down in tears, and so did the child. This was pretty unsettling. However, we eventually got the child into the car and drove off. The kid waved to his large group of mates as he was driving and just sobbing. Now, with the intel on this kid, I was expecting someone different, but he turned out to be a really nice kid. For the first 40 miles or so of the trip he just cried and cried, but eventually he talked a bit, and I asked him the usual stuff like what TV shows he liked and that. Eventually he started to tell us the things his mother did to him, see above, and all we could do was listen and say that his dad was trying to get custody. When we arrived where we were going, after about 4 hours of driving, me and my partner were feeling pretty sorry for this kid and has an image of the mother in our minds. Lo and behold, when we arrived at the destination the mother was very polite to us. However, we couldn't shake the feeling that it was a facade. This is the worst bit though, we had no power of entry to check the premises for standard of living for the child, so we just literally dumped him at a place he didn't want to be. I remember me and my partner waiting outside to see if we noticed any abuse straight away, so we could go in and take him away from his mother. However, lo and behold, nothing happened, so we just left. It was a real eye-opener, especially on my first shift, that you don't always get to be the good guy. TLDR transported youth who didn't want to go home because of alleged abusive parent. Took him home anyway. I also have another story. We were called to a stabbing, major incident, after a robbery of a local convenience store. The man inside had been stabbed multiple times and was pretty much dying when we got there. Myself and my partner were chasing the guy who did it, but we lost him in the backtracks, woods, Aish. Turns out the person was stabbed was a young man, 25 Aish, who had just bought the place with his new wife. They also had a 1-year-old baby in the back of the shop at the time of the stabbing. Luckily the guy survived. He had a punctured lung, but it just shows you how disgusting some people can be. TLDR man stabbed, baby in the back of the shop at the time. This was some years ago. I work in a large city in the Midwest, known for its crime rate. One holiday evening, really cold out, I was dispatched to the local grocery store, i.e. bodega, for a retail theft in progress. I arrived to find the store owner and his son sitting on an old man. I ask what happened, and the owner replies this asshole stole from me before and has doing it again. I come to find out the old man, a Korean War vet who lived down the block in some of our less desirable apartments, was stealing grocery items over the past few weeks and the owner had enough. Turns out, the old man was stealing cat food. His reasoning? He was so hungry, and he needed to feed his only companions and friends his cats and he figured no one would miss cat food. This broke my heart. My partner and I tried to talk the store owner out of signing complaints. We talked to him for what seemed like forever, but he was unbudging. In the end, we had a victim, we had a crime, and we had an offender, and had to arrest him. I couldn't do a thing about it. The entire situation made me sick and the entire time we were transporting him to lockup he cried about who would take care of his cats. My partner, my sergeant and myself spent the next few hours calling elder care agencies in the area to try and get this guy some assistance when he got out. I'm not entirely sure he would accept any care. TLDR, old man held by store for stealing cat food so him and his cats don't starve. I have to make the arrest. Breaks my heart, but I ditch court and I'm pretty sure he got off. I purposely missed court that day and I believe the charge was thrown out since neither myself or the store owner was in court. I got a write-up for that one, and if bosses ever found out I did it on purpose, I could be in more trouble. This job sucks sometimes, and while most people think we are bullies and knuckle draggers, we are put in shitty situations constantly. I've cried more times than I can count on this job. My second arrest ever. I was locking up a 13-year-old witness to a robbery for possession of alcohol. All we wanted to do was get him into the station so he could be questioned by the detectives because we hoped he would name names, which he did. For possession of alcohol, he wouldn't have spent but more than an hour in jail with dropped charges and been released to his parents. While arresting him, his 14-year-old sister came up. She couldn't have been more than 5 feet, 90 pounds. Seeing her brother in cuffs, she got upset and began to cuss at us. She then pushed and assaulted myself and my partner and threatened to get a gun and shoot you in the faking head. I didn't feel she would actually do this, and being that I was much bigger than her, I didn't feel threatened at all, even when she pushed and kicked me. But there were onlookers and a police supervisor had arrived on scene. and what she had done was felony threats and assault on a police officer. I had to place her under arrest and put in the back of the squad car next to her brother. Once we calmed her down, she turned out to be a real sweet, just protective girl. She said she wanted to join the military so she could get out of this city. She fortunately is taking a plea and will be sentenced to a program where she won't have to spend any time in jail. I really, truly wish the best for her. Edit, grammar and spelling. Working the highway and was heading back to the station toward the end of shift when the car in front of me started driving a little erratically halfway on the shoulder and about 10 miles per hour under the speed limit, so I hit the lights. The driver slowly turned onto a side street and continued for about a quarter mile at 15 miles per hour before he finally stopped. I could tell he was thinking about running or fighting, both of which he later confirmed passed his mind, so I was on guard. I walk up to the car and see that it's a male and female, face tats and baggy clothes, your typical gangster looking dude. I take his ID and information and run it. He's got a warrant for animal cruelty and failure to appear. She's got a PPO out against the driver, her husband, and a warrant for domestic. I called for another car and we arrested both. The male started crying immediately, saying that they were on their way to pick up their daughters from elementary school to have one last afternoon together before their kids moved across state to their grandparents because of all of the issues the couple was having. He said he was driving poorly because they were wrapping a couple of presents for the kids, which was true, to give to them before they left. I was pretty heartbroken immediately because my kids are the same age and I really felt for this guy, even though we were on different ends of the social spectrum. Turns out the animal abuse charge was dropped because he was falsely accused, and the PPO was set to be dropped a couple of weeks later, and everything that they were arrested for was nothing big in the end. They were all felony warrants though, so I had no choice. We had to call a social worker to get the kids from school. Guy cried all the way to the jail and I couldn't talk to him, otherwise I would have cried too. I have no idea when the next time he got to see his kids was, and I think about it all the time. I don't take taking people to jail lightly, so I can't think of any times off the top of my head that taking someone to jail was heartbreaking. The only arrests that are mandatory, no discretion, are domestic violence complaints, which I've never really felt sorry for. There have been tons of times where I can certainly relate to how the person's feeling and how upset they are, and can even agree that maybe they're getting a raw deal and feel bad for them, but it never excuses whatever they did against their spouse/partner. I've been a cop for 4 years, but the closest incident that answers the question was when I was a private security guard at an amusement park in college. We got reports of a man beating and screaming at a young boy. We caught up to them leaving the park and could clearly see one of his 3 children had red marks all over his back. It was completely covered. They were leaving the water park part. He had no shirt on. Normally we would walk the guy to the office, or at least out of the way before handcuffs, or not even use them, and just have him wait for the police to come do their thing. But he started getting pretty vocal and then tried to walk away from us. So we ended up having to somewhat wrestle him into custody in front of his 3 young kids, who are now bawling hysterically. The guy was ultimately charged and convicted for the assault, and it was hard to feel bad for him, but damn, those kids, he's their dad, and they don't see him as we did, in that one incident/bad decision/one moment of lost control. Plenty of people have their sob stories, or are going through pretty rough times that make you kinda feel for them, but you just sort of get numb to it, to the point where nothing really stands out. Now that I'm trying to think of examples. My daddy has been a deputy sheriff for about a decade now, and even though he's generally a big goof, he was really affected by an accident he worked about 3 years into his job. We lived in a small city just outside the capital of Arkansas. He always tried to work close to us in case we needed him, but this meant he work a lot of calls that were pretty close to home. A car was crossing a 4-way stop when an 18-wheeler blew the stop sign and just crushed the car. There were 3 girls in it, all from Jacksonville High School, including my teacher's daughter. All 3 girls died on impact, and, of course, it was a completely gruesome scene. My dad was one of the first responders, and he had to see it all. Ever since then he always makes sure we wear our seatbelts, as if it would help much in that situation. I remember when he came home from that shift. He looked very tired, and for a few weeks after that he didn't say much of anything, and he told me recently that nothing really affects him anymore, and he probably won't cry when his parents die. This is why I get so defensive about cops. Don't call them names, because when you need help, they're the ones who could be risking their lives to help you. My mom's dad, uncle, and stepmother were all cops too, retired now, and I don't think people realize that a lot of cops are alcoholics because of what they have to see. My dad has had a lot of trouble with drinking as well, and that's really hard to see from a daughter's path. But I'll stop my ranting now. I'm just pretty biased about cops. I made an account just to post this and hopefully change somebody's mind about cops. TLDR, my dad worked a scene where 3 girls from our town were crushed, and now he doesn't get affected by much. This is my best friend's story. I've been friends with him all my life and know these to be 100% true. He pulls over a 13-year-old boy who is out with 2 of his friends driving his mom's car, sets him on his way to his parents, and then a year later gets a call to a house where a mother believes her kid has a gun and wants to kill himself. He shows up, and it's the same kid. Dad is no longer around, and he finds my best friend responsible for his life going down the toilet. He threatens to kill my friend if he tries to stop him from killing himself, and my friend has to talk him out of it. He has a gun with him when he makes the threat to kill my friend, so he is charged with a felony for threatening my friend, even though my friend doesn't believe he'd do it. The threat is made in front of other officers, so my friend's opinion doesn't matter. The other is he gets a phone call to an apartment complex that there is a drunk lady screaming at her daughter. He shows up, and a drunk woman has found out her 13-year-old daughter has had sex, and she wants to scream at her about it in front of everyone at the pool. The daughter has called her father to come pick her up. He shows up, and they have taken this argument back to their apartment. The father shows up to pick the girl up, but the mother is still drunk and screaming at her daughter she is a hoe. My friend tells the girl to leave with her father, only to find out a week later the girl violates her custody by going with her father. The girl's mother files a lawsuit which ends up getting thrown out, but she gets to tell a judge that the father molested their daughter when she was a year old, and she doesn't remember her dad molesting her, and that's why she wants her away from her father. The judge rules this needs to be investigated. She's now late 14. He's in the department filling out paperwork, and a 14-year-old girl appears to him and sits next to him. She has ran away from her home, and another officer has picked her up. She tells him she's going to go to jail because she'd rather do that than go home with her mother. He offers to take her to jail for the other officer because he wants to talk her out of it. On the way to jail she tells him she has a crush on him and asks him if he wants a girlfriend to live with him. She tells him she'd have sex with him if he'd take her to his home. He has to submit his arresting tape into her parents' custody hearing where the mother accused the father of molesting her when she was younger. The tape was used against the father. The father was newly married, and thankfully he was deemed fit enough to raise his daughter with his new wife. He was never more torn over whether the father had molested her or she was an innocent girl scarred by her mother's terrible parenting. It was Christmas time, and I was out back in the alley behind my house just enjoying a beer and conversation with my 3 closest buddies. December in Texas. My closet buddy, Rusty, was telling us about his new idea to scam Christmas celebrators, which he always seems to have an abundance of. All of a sudden the yellow taxi cab pulled up, and I could see an older lady with a walker struggling to get out. I ran over quickly to the cab to help her out and simply just welcome her to the neighborhood. I'm block captain after all. The lady, Mrs. Wakefield, was actually coming to visit my home. As it turns out, she grew up in the house and she just wanted to see the old place. I take a lot of pride in my home, so I was, of course, glad to welcome her in and introduce her to my family. We welcomed her to stay for dinner and we propane barbecued her up something special, no charcoal garbage. She had a lot of great stories about growing up in the house and the neighborhood, and the night was wonderful. It was wonderful until she refused to leave. She started acting sick and tired and then started to pretend to fall asleep. When we realized that she didn't want to leave, we asked her why, and she told us that she came by in order to die in your house. Mrs. Wakefield felt that she was at the end of her life and her last wish was to die in her old home, my current home. I wasn't going to have this. It's just odd. I tried to reason with her, and she refused to budge. I then called a cab, physically picked Mrs. Wakefield up over my shoulder, and put her in the cab. The next day she came back to apologize. I accepted her apology, but then she tried to sneak into the house by asking to use the bathroom, and I knew what she was up to. She tried to force her way into my front door when I confronted her, so again I had to carry her out of the house as she tried to reason with me about dying in my house. She started to kick my door at this point until she eventually left. Gone right? Nope. Later that day I left the home with my family to go Christmas shopping. When we came back I could tell something was off, and of course, she was there hiding in a closet. She snuck into the house to try and die while we were out shopping. I had to call the cops at that point to have an old lady removed from my home as the entire neighborhood watched at what I was doing to this poor old woman. The cops weren't on my side either and took indirect shots at me. Great. I ended up settling things with Mrs. Wakefield and she died somewhere else. On the plus side, she opted for cremation and we used the finest Strickland propane to honor her final memory. TLDR, old house owner shows up asking to die in my house. I call the cops and end up setting her on fire. Reddit is not alone in its almost uniform hate of law enforcement officers. For the Leos out there, I'm good friends with several. It's nothing new. Unfortunately for most of them, it's simply a part of the job they have to deal with. Honestly, almost every job I can think of has its percentage of assholes. Law enforcement is no different. The difference for law enforcement in our country, in this day and age, is that every aspect of their job is under scrutiny almost every second of the day. The main reason for this simply boils down to liability and lawsuits. What's sad is that more and more people who go into law enforcement for the right reasons are leaving the profession altogether because of this. People here on Reddit boldly proclaim how officers should not enforce laws they know not to be right. I wonder what these people would do in the officer's place. Mostly nothing, I'd wager, since none of them likely have the personal fortitude or strength of character to do the job. Tell you what, you take a job where you routinely see the shittiest side of the human race, day after day, and then let me know a year later if any of your views have changed. People talk about letting people go for just a bit of weed or people met with certain circumstances. That's all well and good. We talk of officer discretion. However, in this day and age, where people routinely use the law to their own advantage, and filing lawsuits seems to be the new national sport, officers are risking their jobs and sometimes their freedom doing so. Not my story, but being me working in system, I know a few stories. This one story pissed me off so bad. A head parole officer had this guy on his case load that did roughly 9 or 10 years in prison and was put on parole. I can't remember exactly what he did, but it was pretty serious. I wanna say some type of armed robbery. So this guy was put on an extended parole period, and over a few years this parole officer began forging somewhat of a friendship, still professional, with this guy. Often going over on checkups to play chess or just chat and drink coffee. So this guy was in his last year of his parole sentences, doing very well. From what the officer said, he was really a changed man. He did his time. So this guy goes to this small store downtown in this small town and ends up parking behind his nuts ex-wife. Ex-wife spots and comes up to the side window and punching it. She eventually hopped on the hood of his car and took her heel off and was smashing it against his windshield. There was a police station roughly 50 yards away from where he was parked, so this guy stupidly decides to slowly drive his car into the police station with her on top of it. He pulls in, and an officer spots, and it comes over to assist the situation. Long story short, the guy breaks his parole because he endangered her life, and his sentence is to another 10 years in prison. Fact. Cop story from Russia. My cousin is a cop in Russia and some students from the US were on school trip to Russia. One of the kids, actually a senior who was 18, was back home. A little suburban gang member Juan was arrested a bunch of times back home with real consequences. He was busted for trying tag a war memorial and was caught by a groundskeeper. The kid pulls out a small knife, cuts the worker and runs. Shortly afterwards my cousin catches him. While my cousin is transporting him to the station, the kid was laughing thinking it's all a huge joke and brags how he will be back in the hotel before my cousin went back home. The kid did not go back to the hotel, but was in prison for 5 months until his trial. My cousin was in court to testify. After 5 months in prison, the kid went from being a little thug and looked like a scared deer caught in the lights. In Russia, the defendants sit in cage while in court while wearing a prisoner's uniform. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison for attempted murder, slashing the groundskeeper, criminal desecration of grave and criminal vandalism of a historical object. When the translator told him the sentence in English, the kid fainted. My cousin felt bad for him, since he had no idea that he would be punished so severely. And he really felt bad for him, because he was going to go from a fairly easy prison in the city to an actual harsh prison that is going to be in the middle of nowhere, and his only contact with his friends and family will be a 1-page letter per month, 2 to 3 5-minute phone calls per year, and 1 visit per year. When I was a sergeant in the small town in MA that I worked in, we got a call of a man being beaten with a baseball bat. We arrived at the house and found the victim lying on the ground with multiple bruises and broken bones, no headshots. The victim was conscious and speaking to us about how sorry he was. Here was the story. The victim was a 38-year-old neighbor of the victim, a 7-year-old boy. The victim had been sexually assaulting the boy for a period of 3 to 4 months before the parents discovered the evidence. The son had finally broke down in tears and told his mom and dad that Danny had touched him and made him put his pee-pee in his mouth. The father called Danny and asked him to come over to the house. The father confronted Danny and asked him what had occurred. The guy had the audacity to tell the father that he was in love with his 7-year-old son and that the sex was consensual. "Are you fucking kidding me?" Well, needless to say, the father's response was to pummel Danny with a baseball bat he had in the garage and cause major internal damage to the pedophile. We had to arrest both parties, and it killed me to arrest the dad for protecting his son. I explained to his son that dad would not be gone for long. We had to talk to him some more at the police station. I admired the guy for breaking the guy's ribs, leg, etc., but we had to arrest him and the pedophile. Danny is now in state prison for a term no less than 15 years, and the father's case was played out to a lesser offense, at his own choice, no jail time. So in a sense, justice was served. My second year on the job, I got a call to go to the emergency room of a local hospital to investigate a rap. The victim was about 58 years old and absolutely blasted drunk. She insisted that her roommate, 71-year-old male, had rapped her and demanded that we go arrest him. She refused to go into detail, except that he had sexually penetrated her against her will. She refused a sexual assault exam and refused to allow us to collect evidence. At this point it's just not adding up, but we still have to treat it as valid. We go to the apartment and meet our suspect. He's a soft-spoken man dressed in a security guard uniform and getting ready to head out to work his graveyard shift. We take a seat with him in his living room as he tells his side of the story. 5 years ago he lost his wife to an auto accident. She was the only woman he ever loved, and they were high school sweethearts. There are many pictures of them around the room, and he still wears his wedding ring. He explains that since she died, he has had trouble with the bills. He sold the house to move into an apartment, and even that is getting rough, so he takes out an ad to get a roommate. He let this lady move in 3 months ago, and she has been drunk every day. The first month she paid rent. The second month she used it for vodka. Then she started asking him for money to buy vodka, but he refused. 3 weeks ago she got caught stealing vodka at the market, but the store let her go. After that she came to him with blackmail. "If you don't buy me vodka, 2 to 3 large bottles per day, I'll call the police and tell them you rapped me." He did for a couple days just out of fear, but enough was enough, and this morning he said no more. I could see the sadness in his eyes as he said that he has never had any kind of sex with anyone but his wife, and now he could not, even if he tried, due to prostate and testicular cancer. This sad story in hand, we head off to the station and discuss it with the watch commander. He says she made an allegation of rap. It's not for us to decide. Go back and huck him up. Besides, the DA will never file charges on a case like this knowing it was wrong, but being too new to know what to do other than follow orders, we booked him. This probably caused him to lose his security job and also leaves her free to enjoy the apartment. A couple hours later a call comes out from the apartment that neighbors, friends of the old man, had the woman come door to door trying to sell the things in his apartment. 18 years later I still feel badly and wish that I had had enough experience to stop it. It may have been legally right, questionable, but definitely not the morally right thing to do. TLDR, alcoholic lady blackmails for vodka and cries rap when it's not enough. I'm not a cop, I'm a paramedic, but I made a call one night for an 18-year-old domestic violence. We arrived and the cop came up to the ambulance to let me know what was up. He told me that the son and dad got in a fight and the parents are claiming the son threatened to kill them. So we go into the home, and the dad is clearly not injured, but the kid was beat up pretty badly. It was fairly obvious it was a one-sided fight. The parents and his siblings say that he got on top of his dad and started fighting him, and that his dad was defending himself without a scratch on him. The officers said that the kid was getting arrested, but we had to do our medical part. I could tell the officer thought it was bullshit, but the father said he wanted to press charges. So we put him in the ambulance and we went off. En route he told me he was suicidal and just wanted the officer to kill him. He said that he just got out of a serious long-term relationship and his family hated him. Normally my BS, privileged kid meter goes off here, but for some reason it didn't. So I started talking to him. How long were you with her? He then gave me the most sorrowful look I've ever seen. It tore my heart in two. Typing this out I'm starting to cry again. How long were you with him? This point he broke down sobbing and told me how he tried to kill himself when he was 15. He was the only son in a Chinese family of 6 and his mom was no longer able to have kids. He was born in China and given everything growing up. At the hospital his parents badgered him until he came out. Since that point they would regularly tell him they hated him. His mom said she wished she had have gotten an abortion. His father said that he was worthless living, etc. etc. Just daily emotional abuse. He cried the entire way there, and I did too. He wanted to go to university and had plans, but was just done. So I called a friend of mine, being a part of the LGBT community locally myself, and got some resources to help him out. When we got to the hospital the officer pulled in behind us, and we took him into his room. In the room I asked everyone to leave, and shut the door. I gave him a great big hug, and told him about myself, and things do look up. When I left the room I told the officer what was up, and asked what he had to do. The kid was going to be arrested eventually for misdemeanor domestic assault and battery. He ended up losing, and spent 8 months in jail. I think about him all the time and what happened. I know that's not strictly from an officer's perspective, but he said it was the hardest call he had to make, but no one would say the dad beat the ever-living shit out of his son, and when we went to court, I had to testify. They had somehow produced bruises on the dad's face for evidence. Despite my report, the local PD and county sheriff's reports stating the dad had no visible injuries. It sucked. TLDR Story 1. I was forced by my sergeant to arrest someone that I did not want to arrest. Story 2. I bought hamburgers for a homeless man who was hungry instead of arresting him for trespassing. Story 1. A few years ago, while working for a Metro Atlanta department, I got a call about a 20-year-old who had broken a window at his house with his head after an argument with his parents. He ran out of the house, bleeding, and his parents were concerned about his safety. The fire department located him sitting on a corner in the subdivision crying. I was the first officer on scene, followed shortly by my beat partner and my sergeant. Once I started talking to him, I noticed that he had been drinking. I left him sitting on the corner under the supervision of the other officer and my sergeant, and went back to my patrol car to call his parents on the phone. I told them that we located their son, he was not seriously injured, and asked them what they wanted to do. They said they weren't interested in pressing charges for breaking the window. I wasn't too concerned about his drinking, as he wasn't really causing a problem. My plan was to just drive him back home and drop him off with a stern warning about controlling his actions. While finishing the phone call with his parents, my sergeant yells on the radio for me to get back over there as soon as possible. The kid is standing up, and my sergeant is standing across from him with his pepper spray out. I hear my sergeant yelling at him, telling him to sit back down. I hear the kid reply that he has asthma and is having trouble breathing while sitting. He said he just needed to stand up so he can breathe easier. At this point, the other officer returned from where I don't know and tackled the kid to the ground. He placed him in handcuffs and told me that he thought the kid was about to attack my sergeant. From my perspective, that was bullshit. My sergeant tells me to charge him with damaging property, the broken window, underage consumption of alcohol, and disorderly conduct. I told him that his parents didn't want to press charges for the window, but that didn't matter too much. In Georgia, the victims of family violence do not have to press charges, the state does it. This is great for situations where a woman is afraid to press charges against her abusive husband, but not so great in this situation. My sergeant overruled my objections, and I took him to jail. I didn't charge him with disorderly conduct, because I did not see that at all, but I was forced to charge the other two. I did write a very detailed report, stating everything that happened, and then called the detective who would be following up on the case, and told him my opinion about it. Hopefully that kid was never convicted. Story 2. This story is much better. I once received a call about a homeless man who was begging in a grocery store parking lot. I got there and spoke to the manager who had called. He said that he asked the man to leave earlier, and when he didn't leave immediately, he decided he wanted him arrested for trespassing. I went and spoke to the homeless man. He told me that he had not eaten in 2 days and was not begging for money. He said that he was just trying to find some work for food. I told him to stay where he was and then drove to McDonald's. I purchased 10 hamburgers, a couple orders of fries, and some drinks, and drove back to meet him in the parking lot. We ate dinner together off of the hood of my car right in front of the store. The manager kept sticking his head out the door and I would give him a "what are you going to do about?" look each time. There have been quite a few, but the first one that comes to mind is a woman in her late 80s for domestic violence. She had her son, daughter-in-law, and grandson from a different child living with her. There was a custody dispute over the grandson. The old woman wanted him to stay with her, where he had lived his whole life. He was about 12 years old. But the son and daughter-in-law wanted him to live with them, probably so they could collect the social security benefit the boy got, because his mother was disabled. So one evening they get into an argument. I don't even remember what it was over, but it ends when the old woman pushed the daughter-in-law very lightly away from her. But the DL was standing right in front of a low coffee table and fell backwards over it, breaking the table and hitting her head. There were injuries and the old woman admitted it. The DL absolutely insisted on signing a complaint, probably thinking it would help with the custody dispute, which obligated us to arrest. I hadn't given up yet and thought perhaps I could try presenting it as a psychiatric problem. So I took the old lady to a psychiatric emergency room and explained to the staff what happened. They admitted her, but an hour later called and said after she was evaluated by the doctor they couldn't keep her. The nurses tried to admit her to the medical unit because her blood pressure was elevated, but after she was there it came back down, so the doctor would not keep her for that either. So I had to go arrest a woman in her 80s. She looked like my recently passed away grandma, and I had to slam to steel barred jail door as her tiny little white-haired glasses-wearing self sat on a hard jail bunk for the entire weekend. To qualify somewhat, the family was dysfunctional and this was not our first or even 10th experience with them. But it was usually about her kids or grandson and not her. And her daughter-in-law just seemed so triumphant about this. And she just looked so much like my own grandma that it really fucking sucked. TLDR. Arrested an old woman that looked like my recently departed grandma for a bullshit domestic violence. I was sent to pick up a parole jumping ex-con who had saved my life just a few days before and was in the process of saving someone else's. When I arrived I ended up not going through with it. Forgive me, this is a long story. My law enforcement career started as a guard at a maximum security prison. It was sometimes terrifying, but at the end of the day I enjoyed it. Many prisoners were accepting of their position but we had one prisoner in particular who was constantly trying to stir things up. He actually tried to escape no less than 4 times. It didn't help that he was abnormally strong and loved to show off. So we constantly had to find ways to calm him down and keep his spirit down. I had always assumed he was in for life and developed a bit of an enmity with him. It caught me by surprise one day when I was handed a copy of his parole papers. In a last act of bravado, I accidentally told him my full name, which I later realized would have made it easy for him to track me down. He never did. Within a month, however, he had broken the terms of his parole, and I made it my job to track him down, but I eventually made it less of a priority after a long time without success. I moved from the prison into a job working for my country's federal law agency. One of our main mandates is providing law enforcement services to any jurisdiction too small or rural to have their own. After almost a decade, I applied for a chief's position in a small town and got the post. When I met the mayor for the first time, I was surprised to discover that it was the parole jumper. I couldn't believe this guy was the master of the house, but I reported it anyway, only to be told that they'd actually caught the guy the day before and had him in holding. I guess the mayor found out about it because he actually went and turned himself in before they could convict the other wrong guy of anything. No idea how evidence processing dropped the ball there. He was somehow let go, so I went to see him, and in the confrontation he knocked me out and ran. I encountered him almost another decade later when I'd transferred back into the city. He was the victim of a robbery, and I was the officer that responded to the call. He ran without filing a report. The city had been having some gang-related issues. I won't tell you what gang, but their colors were red and black, and I had been working undercover to get some intel on them. Normally we do this kind of work in pairs, but in this particular case I was on my own. One of the youngest members ended up recognizing me and outed me as a cop, and they were ready to kill me when the parole jumper showed up, of course, and told them he wanted me for himself. Instead of killing me, the guy lets me go. Even though I warned him I'd still have to come after them. He said that didn't matter and that I was just doing my job. One day more, and it wouldn't have mattered. We performed a raid the next day and sent in a bunch of guys, but when the smoke cleared, my guy wasn't anywhere to be found. We did one last sweep of the building, but there was nothing there, just empty chairs at empty tables. But I was determined to get this guy and bring him home. A witness mentioned that he saw a guy escape out a back entrance we didn't know about during the first attack, and I got sent to find the guy. Turns out it's my guy, and the reason he ran was because in our initial strike someone accidentally hit an innocent civilian who had no place being there in the first place. He was carrying the guy away to try and get him patched up, and I ended up letting him go and do it. As it turned out, the civilian was the grandson of a wealthy businessman in town. I hear he's now planning on marrying the ex-con's daughter. So yeah, I never quite figured out what to make of all of this. It's tough when you spend your whole career thinking something about someone, only for them to turn out to be something totally different. I think about it almost every day. When I was 17 years old, I got into a fight with my brother, then 19 years old. He had just transferred from one college to another, basically losing all of his credits and costing my parents $19,000. So, needless to say, tensions were high. I walked into the house to find him wearing my jacket. Long and short of it, he ends up pushing me, and I end up punching him. We brawled for a few minutes like brothers sometimes do, but it ended when my mom punched 911 into the phone and yelled in a no bullshit manner, "I'll do it. So both of you stop." We quickly shook hands, apologized, and were on our way out the door together to go grab lunch when the police showed up. It turned out that a phone will automatically dial 911 after a few seconds if the number is punched in, but the send button wasn't hit. My mom, just being my mom, let the officer inside where we explained what happened. After a few moments, the officer explains that I committed domestic violence for hitting my brother in the face. He went on to explain that the county was cutting down on DM and he was in a tough spot. If he let me go and this happened again, it would cost him his job. So, he ended up handcuffing and arresting me at the ripe old age of 17. I was bawling like a baby when I was walking out to the squad car, and you could tell this officer was crushed and doing everything he could to hold back his tears. My mom was in a world of guilt and he was trying to console her. He spent at least an hour on the phone making calls and trying to stop this from happening. He wasn't able to change anything, and I spent the night in jail. I found out the next morning that the officer wrote a personal note to the judge stating that I had learned my lesson and should not have been arrested in the first place, and I was let off with nothing on my personal record. To add to this officer's grace, I was then pulled over by him the next week for going 47 in a 25. He let me off. That maybe should have been ticketed. In hindsight, the guy was in a tough spot doing what was morally right versus protecting his job. But all things considered, he was a pretty stand-up guy. I'm not a Leo, but I live in an area that's a weird mix of gentrified and old rough neighborhood. I had my front door open fairly late one night to catch the cool breeze and happened to look up to see a stranger standing in my hallway. I freaked out a bit and chased him out while yelling at my girlfriend to call the police. The guy seemed like a pretty well-groomed, middle-class guy from the waist up. But I'm guessing he was faked in half on some kind of drug because he wasn't wearing pants and his legs were covered in fesses. He seemed out of it more than any kind of home invader. When the cops showed up a few minutes after he left, I was telling them the story and giving them the description, and one of the officers was a younger woman who clearly thought the whole situation was hilarious. She was trying to be professional, but since I clearly wasn't freaked out and I was describing a pantsless, fesses covered hipster who didn't remember where he lived at 2 AM on a Wednesday morning, well, it was pretty funny. The other officer though has this look like I'd knocked up his sister or something. He'd clearly thought this through and realized that they were probably going to find the guy, and that would mean handling a man covered in poo and quite possibly having to put a fesses covered hipster in his car. The call had clearly faking ruined his night. I felt so bad for the poor guy. As a rookie, I had to arrest a Gulf War veteran who was confined to a wheelchair and paralyzed from the waist down and had no use one of his arms. Apparently he had a hooker come over who refused to do her job because he really stunk. It was a hot summer day and perhaps the whole wheelchair paralyzed thing freaked her out. I guess he got angry and stabbed the girl. Of course, being the rookie, I had to take the arrest. Transporting him back to the station house was a chore. We had to get a van and they are not really handicapped friendly. His wheelchair was electric. When I wheeled him into the precinct, one of the officers smirked. "What did you get him for? Speeding?" I tried my best to not laugh. Fingerprinting a guy with a dead hand is also difficult. But my job was not over. The desk lieutenant made me vouch for the backup battery that he carried in the wheelchair as personal property. When I escorted the guy to central booking, he was a medical walkthrough, or should I say roll through, which means he doesn't go with the main population of prisoners. Central booking is not a wheelchair friendly place either. It's like a collection of mazes and dungeons. Of course, his battery died and I was stuck pushing this electric wheelchair around, and this guy smelled so much. But since he was a veteran and fought for our country, I gave him all the respect he deserved. I made sure he was as comfortable as possible and I talked to him to pass the time. Every other person in the room had looks of disgust and were holding their noses because my prisoner smelled so much. After several hours, this man finally saw the judge, and I don't remember what the outcome was, but I know he was home the next day because this same guy called 911 to make a complaint of burglary. When we left his apartment the previous day, the key that this guy gave us was not closing the lock. We tried and tried. Finally we said fuck it, leave it open, and I think we told the superintendent. Apparently, someone went into the guy's apt and took his only air conditioner. I felt really bad at that point. I responded and explained to him what happened. TL, doctor arrested a smelly paralyzed veteran for assault too, had many obstacles, treated him with respect. I was a corrections officer at a state penitentiary, and we had an inmate there that I'll call Bobby. Bobby was in his mid-20s and was never a problem. I made it a habit to not know why inmates were locked up, but this guy was one of those "hey you check out this sheet." I looked him up in our system to check the info out to be sure it was legit. Bobby had never really had a real job. His parents babied him and all he had ever done was work maybe 20 hours a week in his dad's cabinet shop. They were not rich, but very well off. This isn't TN, so pretty much he was an outgoing redneck good old boy that wanted for nothing and never caused any trouble. One night he and his best friend were driving down some back road in his daddy's truck and had a little too much to drink and crashed, killing his best friend and permanently injuring himself. He got a manslaughter charge and a pretty large sentence. Now before you get all mad at me, I think if you drink and drive you deserve to get faked up all the way and should never drive again. My point is that one time he told me, Officer XXXXX, they could have gave me 100 years or a day cause it wouldn't have mattered. Every day I have to wake up and realize that I'm still alive and I killed my best friend in the whole world and nothing can change that. My sister-in-law was a prison guard off on stress leave from work and was having a lot of problems with drugs and alcohol a few years back, much of it stemming from her dirtbag boyfriend who regularly beat her. She never pressed charges or called the cops because she thought she loved the asshole. After about 6 months of this bullshit, she's on the verge of losing her house as all her money is going up her nose. She finally accepts her family's offer to get her into rehab in another province and tells dirtbag she's doing this and he needs to move out. He loses it, trashes the place, beats her up, and she can't kick him out because of our bullshit tenant laws. She had to give him 30 days notice to move out and stayed with her parents in the meantime. 3 weeks later she has been accepted into rehab and goes back to the house to get a few things. Dirtbag tries to lure her back and threatens to kill her if she leaves. He comes at her with a knife and she throws a heavy plastic cup at his head and runs away. 2 hours later she's arrested and he's pressing assault charges. The cop arresting her was one of her good friends and had worked with her 4 years at the prison. She was in tears as she read her rights because she knew all about how dirtbag had been treating her. Well, for me, it's not the arrest I made, it's the arrest I didn't make. I used to get called out on domestic disputes all the time. I've done probably hundreds over the years. But there was this one piece of shit that I will never forget. He was a huge fat guy, weighed about 270 pounds. But his wife was really tiny. He used to mercilessly abuse her. My partner and I get called out there every weekend, and one of us would pull her aside and tell her that she should press charges. But this lady was scared. She wasn't going to cross him no matter what. So we would drive him to the holding cell, throw him in the drunk tank, and he'd be back the next day. One night, my partner was out sick, and it was just me. I get the usual call. He had broken her nose in the shower. So I get there, cuff him, put him in the car and away we go. We are driving into town, and he is in my backseat humming Danny Boy, and that just rubbed me the wrong way. So instead of turning left, I go right, out into nowhere. I take him out of my car, still handcuffed, and I knelt him down. I put my revolver in his mouth, and I said something to the effect of "This is it. This is how it ends." No, he's swearing to God he's gonna leave her alone, screaming as much as you can with a gun in your mouth. After a few minutes I took the gun out of his mouth and I say, "So help me, if you ever touch her again I will faking end your miserable life." 2 weeks later he killed her with a blender. The moral of the story is, I chose a half measure when I should have gone all the way. I'll never make that mistake again. Stands up, no more half measures, Walter. Not exactly law enforcement, but I'm almost there. Currently in background. I worked as a loss prevention officer for JCPenney for a year and a half. I saw all kinds of weird stuff. From customers pupping in hallways, to fist fights with felons, use of force continuum, whatever force you find necessary to detain/apprehend a subject safely. I remember this one time, we had a male come in and throw a pair of kid shorts into his backpack. Upon confronting the guy with my partner, he immediately ran. We can only pursue subjects X amount of distance before it's out of our jurisdiction. We nabbed him about 10 feet from the original point of confrontation. He fell to his knees crying, exclaiming that he just got out of prison about a year ago and had just lost his job. He said it was his son's birthday and he hadn't seen his son since he got out and didn't have the money to purchase him a gift. He was going to walk 7 miles to see his son as he didn't even have money for the bus. Then he told us that, if we apprehended him, it would be his third strike, and he would go back to prison. Both my partner and myself had considered recovering the merchandise and letting the man go with a warning. Before we could even say anything, a police officer who works at the mall had seen the whole incident and intervened, tackling the man who was already on his knees in tears. He was detained, brought to our office, and we were forced to write our incident reports, interview the suspect, and write supplementary police reports, all under the watchful eye of the officer. It was pretty sad, and I normally have pretty tough skin, because you can't let emotions get in between doing your job correctly, not rude or arrogant, but correctly and safely. As a police officer here in Canada, it's nice to hear some of the appreciation and understanding people come to have, even after what many consider to be a bad experience with police. I've never met an officer who was ever looking to simply hurt or ruin someone's day or life. This sometimes an unfortunate consequence of people's actions. Here in Canada our justice system is rather liberal, while at times I understand this, i.e., no one needs life in jail for shoplifting. This sadly carries over into terrible crimes such as child sexual assault, murder, child porn, and the list goes on. Scumbag defense lawyers try their hardest to minimize terrible crimes, and our judges give lenient judgments with little or no incarceration. Even if jailed for first-degree murder of a child, the offender is still given a time can be paroled, called stat release. I unfortunately have more examples of times I could not make an arrest, lay a charge, or stop a crime from occurring because legislated law or case law prevents me from acting. It's hard to even offer victims any hope when I have to tell victims an offender will likely be released, more often than not, before I'm done my report. I try my hardest at every call to offer people real-world advice of how to protect themselves. Sadly, most people can't afford to make the life changes it takes to truly protect themselves, and our system offers little to no help, and any help is expensive and bureaucratically difficult to obtain. I'm not a police officer, but I thought I would share my story. When I was in high school, my mom and her boyfriend both lost their jobs, so we were having problems making ends meet. My little sister was about to start another year of elementary school, but she barely had any clothes that still fit her, so my mom's boyfriend and I got the bright idea to steal a couple of clothes from Walmart. Well, little did we know the manager was dressed normal and caught us. He took us back to the back and called the police. As a kid in 10th grade, I was beyond scared. I told the police officer what was going on in our life. My dad had recently passed away, so no child support either. The police officers felt bad for us, and we really nice, and didn't want this to be on my record and affect my future. We tried to steal about $100 worth of clothes. The police begged the manager to let it go, but he would not rest until someone took the fall. So my mom's boyfriend told the police to arrest him and keep my name out of it, which they did. I graduated college and got a good job in software development. I just wish I could find those police officers and thank them. TLDR, tried to steal clothes for my little sister because we were broke and got caught. Cops didn't arrest me, even though the asshole Walmart manager wanted them to. I'm not an officer, but this is a story of what the local police did with my brother out of the kindness of their hearts, but I wish they hadn't. I get a call at 11 one night from my brother, who was living with me at the time. He was trying to get clean for months from heroin. He had been sleeping in his car downtown, and the police showed up after someone called to do a safety check on him. They ran his record and saw he had prior arrests for small drug possessions. He pleaded with them and cried that he was clean, he was just really tired. The police let him call me to come and get him. I show up. I half-heartedly believed his story, thanked the police for helping him and calling me. The cops agree not to tow his car so he can pick it up in the morning. He gets in my car, and I start driving home. I ask him if he is high. At this point I'm pretty sure he is, and I tell him he has to cut this shit out. He starts yelling at me and crying that he's not high, and no one ever believes him. Then he opens my car door and jumps out. I was not going very fast as I was approaching a traffic light. I call my mom and dad and tell them what happened. They tell me to go home, they will deal with it the next day. My brother finally apologized for his actions But honestly, even though the cops were trying to be nice to my brother, I wish they had arrested him that night, because about 6 weeks later my brother died of a nod in bed. He was there for almost an entire day before we found him. Sometimes arresting someone can also be a lifesaver for them.